looks like. Oh, we're recording now. But once that's done, you actually have to like furnish the interior unless you want to live inside a set of wooden beams. Not comfy. So CSS is like the set of instructions you give to the people working inside the house to furnish it, to do things like say, what color should the doors be? What types of windows should we have? How tall should the walls be? That sort of thing. All that, but for your web page. So let's try to convert that HTML only page we have here into a stylized one with CSS. So CSS is written in a pretty simple way, I'd say, though these characters might not be useful to you. It's just in this format. You have a selector, there's some curly braces, open new line just for style, not that this is necessary. And then you do the property name, colon, value. Now this won't actually do anything. Let's write something that will actually do something. If you go back here, we see that this paragraph tag has an ID. And what an ID is a name that you can give to an element, but only one element. And by giving that element a name, you can reference it in your CSS to give it styles. Now, say you wanted to give the same name to multiple elements, well, you would use a class instead, not an ID. But today we will just work with IDs. And I've, for your convenience, already added all the IDs that you'll need. So let's go back here. And if you want to add a rule for an element, that's an ID. You just write hash. So that symbol, then the ID name, then your curly braces, and then click enter, make a new line. And then what property are we going to change? Let's change the font size. And I'm going to make it extra large, or X-large as CSS puts it. Now let's click run. And wow, our text is extra large now. Let's add some more changes. Let's say perhaps we should make our link orange. And wow, our link is orange now. So if we go back over here to this web page and we go over to samples/1.html, we can see that this is what the final page with just the basic styles will look like. So for the next 5 to 10 minutes, your challenge is to write the proper CSS that will give you a page like this. I'll put the link in the chat. DM me on Zoom if you need any help or if you're done. And then after 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to come back and we're going to go through the CSS code to make something like this. By the way, you'll write the appropriate CSS in this styles.css file. It's going to work with this because I've already linked it using this line. All works. Just press run on Replit to see your changes. Is there an X button somewhere maybe? I know Replit's UI can be a little weird. If you want to try screen sharing, then we can look at your Replit setup and try to help there. So that does sound a bit annoying. Oh, and if nothing else works, you can always just copy that URL in the address bar and open up your Replit preview in another tab. It should work, but I don't know why it's not working for me. Whatever. By the way, if you can't figure out what the exact colors are, that's not a big deal. Just try to get something that looks pretty similar to this. You can always copy this solution code afterwards. It'll be in samples styles1.css. Do you all want more time, or are we happy to look at the solution code now? All right, so this is the code one of you all made, and this is pretty much on the spot. Well done. Let's actually just copy over the code real quick. And here's a quick rundown of what this does. So the box, we just give it some size, and we give it a border like that. With the button, we just give it a bit more padding so it's spaced out like this, and we give it the color white, no border, a bigger font, green background. Images, they're just a bit bigger, and the rainbow box has no rainbow right now, but it's just a bit bigger with a black border. By the way, design-wise, I would usually not recommend this, but the wacky colors are pretty good for seeing the effects of animations, so that's why we're using it. All right, now on to part two, pseudo classes. So what pseudo classes are these extra bits of text that you can add to your selectors to do fancier things. So let's say we wanted this link to be animated, well, not animated, but change on hover. We would go over here, we would write the hash link, then write a colon, and then hover. And whatever we write here, whatever rules go in here, they will only happen when we're hovering over the button. So let's give it a background color of orange and a color of white. You've probably seen this sort of effect on a lot of websites. Simple CSS effect. Let's do something similar for the box. We'll use the transform property. Transform lets you move or change the size of an element. Let's do transform, translate x, and then 20 pixels. And what this does is that when we hover over this, it moves 20 pixels. Also, let's reduce the opacity. Opacity is how you change the transparency. Let's change it to 50%. So it kind of just like fades out like that. Also, let's work on this button. So we're gonna put button, and then let's make it a yellow background color.
Yo, Muta,
Yeah.
when you type, we can't really hear like what you're saying because I don't know why, but like,
Oh, so sorry about that. I'll
yeah,
try
you're
to
good.
like. Oh yeah, I'll fix that.
You're straight. You're straight.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, when we run that, we can see that when we hover over the button, it now changes color. So let's say for the next 10 minutes, here's the new challenge. We're gonna go to samples/2.html, and over here, you can see that this image, when you hover over it, it increases in size and it rotates, which is pretty neat. And using what you've learned about pseudo classes, can you do something about that? Can you try and make that effect for yourself? The solution code is in samples/styles2.css. DM me on Zoom if you have any questions or if you're done. So again, we're just going to write some code that affects this mountain image to make it rotate and get bigger when we're hovering over it.
we're at a question, and the question is, so like if I have a site, right, and I have the
Mhm.
title of the site, and I want it to be 3D and rotate in circles, not like not vertically, but like horizontally, like go in circles, like as in a 3D shape. Would I still use transform, or is there another? Um,
I'm not entire. How 3D are you talking about? Like a really fancy 3D effect?
no, it's just like if I like you see how it says like random, like let's take the word
Mhm.
random for example, right? When you did the transform rotate thing,
Yeah.
it like rotated it up like in circles, right?
Oh, yeah.
But on the what I'm talking about, can you do it where it's like in circles, like but 3D?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't personally worked with this too much, but uh, there isn't just like rotate and transform. There is rotate X, Y, and Z. And I think one of them, Y, will actually do what you're thinking. Let me try this actually. Transform, rotate. There's a rotate 3D, which is a bit more complicated than that. But yeah, that is possible, though I haven't personally done that before. I don't quite have it, but Google is your best friend for this sort of thing because I know it is possible.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Aha, so if you use transform and then rotate Y and then put a specific number and then DEG to say degrees, you can do that sort of 3D effect. Now, of course, for now, it's only going to be on hover, but later on, we'll learn how to make this an infinite loop,
All
which would
right.
be cool.
Thank you.
So as you can see, if we use the hover effect and then transform and then scale X using negative values, we can reflect an element in the X or Y directions. In this case, we're doing both. So think in 1 or 2 minutes, we'll move on to the last part, which is also the biggest part 3, where we actually like animate this sort of stuff. All right, so now we're going to be on to part 3, but first let's look at the solution for this effect. You see that it's just a pretty simple transform, rotate 45 degrees, then scale it 1.3. If you don't put X, Y, or Z, it just scales in all directions, so it just gets bigger in general like that. All right, so now we're going to talk about the transition property. So by default, as you can see, when a CSS property changes, it just happens instantly. There is no animation of sorts that's happening. So the point of the transition property is to ask CSS, to perhaps transition it, make the change happen more gradually over a particular period of time in a specific way. So there are 4 properties that let us transition our stuff. So let's see. Let's go over to link. So the first one we're going to look at is transition duration. So this is pretty obvious. It's just how long do you want your transition to be? I would recommend something less than a second. We usually write in milliseconds. So let's say 250 milliseconds. That's 1/4 of a second. The next one we're going to look at is transition property. So by default, CSS, once you put this duration, will just animate any change that happens, which is usually what you want. But say maybe you want some properties to animate, but some not. Like maybe you want the size to animate, but not the color. You can specify which properties you want to animate here. So in this case, we're only interested in color and background color. Another one we're going to look at is transition delay. So maybe you want your animation to happen instantly, but say you want a delay, then you can put a delay. we run this and we hover over, you can see that there is a certain leg there because of the delay we put. And then finally, this one is perhaps the most complicated. We have transition timing function. So when a website has an animation, does the animation move at like the same speed all throughout? Probably not. I mean, if you want that, you can put it as linear, but often what you'll see is like a box flying in and like it slows down over time. And that's what this lets us do. So the one I would recommend using most of the time is ease in out. And what this does is that the animation starts off at the regular speed, speeds up, and then slows down. This one usually feels the most natural of all of them. So let's do a few things then. So we gave the button a special color already. Let's see. Let's give an animation to the box. Yeah. Let's say a transition duration of, I'm gonna go with 750 milliseconds. No delay. And let's choose as our timing function, ease in. Let's press run. We'll see that it takes a good amount of time. And as you can see, it speeds up as it goes along. If we make this, say, longer amount of time, you can really see how it just speeds up over time. Please don't set your animations to be this long. That will feel a bit weird, but that's an option. And as you can see, there is a starting animation and an ending animation. So if we look at sample 3, we have quite a few things going here. Oops. We have an animation on the button. We have an animation on the box. We have an animation here. And we have these two animations. These we can't make with just transition, but we're going to talk about that in about 5 minutes. For the next 5 minutes, try to write the code for these animations using just transition. It's pretty much just the same 2 or 3 lines that we just looked at. Also, let me know if you have any questions. Oh, and to whoever just joined, I'm going to post the link for the code that we're working on making. there is one important thing to remember that people sometimes gloss over. You can see that we put these transition rules in the main inside the main selector instead of our pseudo selector. You wonder what happens when you put these or these transition rules inside your pseudo selector. Let's run, and we can see that our starting animation works fine, but when our cursor just goes away, there's no animation. It's so sudden. And the reason this is the case is because any rules inside your pseudo selector will only happen under that specific condition. So these rules are only for when you're hovering over the box. So the instant you stop hovering over that box, all the rules will just stop being applied, and that includes the transition rules. Now, if you don't want an ending transition, then this is fine, but you probably do. So this is just something to watch out for. In, say, 2 minutes, we can look at the final thing, which is CSS animations, but the more manual way. Let me know when you'd like to move on to that section. All right, CSS animations, the last part of this workshop. So while with transition, you just ask CSS to like automatically make the changes that happen in your code more gradual. With the animation properties, it works a little bit different. It's like a more advanced way of doing transitions. So in this case, you create an animation and you put it on the selector, and the selector will run the animation by default once. And we're going to go over how to make these animations. But first, let's look at the basic rules. So animation name, here we just put the name of our animation that we define elsewhere in the code. We'll look at that soon. Animation duration is the duration of our animation. So in this case, we're going to make it the animation happen over 4 seconds. And then animation delay is just, if you want to delay, it works just like with transition delay. And then animation timing function works just like transition timing function, whereas we have the ease in, ease out. I recommend, as always, ease in out since it speeds up and then slows down. And then animation iteration count, by default, your animation will just happen once. But if you want it to happen infinitely, or even just like 2 or 3 or 4 times, you can specify it here. And then animation fill mode, this one is a bit more advanced, but you should know that by default, when your animation ends, the style will just go back to how it was before your animation even happened. But if you set it to forwards, it will keep the end state of your animation. And then what animation play state does is that by default, this is going to be playing, obviously, but say you want the animation to be in a pause state, like how we have here on hover, you can do just that. So here's the more complex part, and this is how we define an animation. So we write at keyframes and then the name of the animation. Here, we're using spin, and then we have all these rules over here. So from is basically what we want the value or like the style to be at the very beginning. And to is how we want it to be at the very end. So here for the spinning thing, we want it to start not rotated at all, 0 degrees, and we want it to end at a full rotation, 360 degrees. And this 25%, 50%, 75% just specifies, okay, at 25% of the way through the animation, we want it to go 90 degrees. So since it's 4 seconds, that'll be 1 second into the animation. 50%, or in this case, 2 seconds, we want it to rotate 180 degrees, which is half a rotation. 75%, we want it to rotate 270 degrees, so that's 3/4. And then we have our final state. And we use a similar sort of thing to make the rainbow box. So in this case, we call our animation rainbow, but we make it 10 seconds long because I found that to look best. And we use a linear timing function since we want the speed to stay the same all throughout. Like we don't want the colors changing faster at a certain point than another. You set it to infinite, of course, and the animation direction, by default, is normal, but if you want, we could set this to reverse. If you want to do that, that's an option. And then here we have at keyframes rainbow. So similar sort of thing here, except instead of from and to, I use 0% and 100%. Works exactly the same, use whatever you like. So at the beginning, we start at red, then we transition to orange, yellow, then green, blue, pink, then back to blue, green, yellow, orange, red. And then it starts over because we have a set to infinite. So red, orange, yellow, green, blue, pink, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. And those are the 2 animations on our page. So we're done the main parts of this workshop now. Yay. So does anyone have any questions? And after this, we're just gonna wrap up the workshop, talk about next steps, that sort of thing. Alrighty then we're going to wrap this up. So I didn't plan for us to get to the very end, so I don't have much to show for this, but uh, you can go more advanced than CSS animations by making animations with JavaScript. Now, is there a performance trade-off? Yeah, it might make your website slower, but if you want to do really, really advanced things that you can't do with CSS, then you always have the option of JavaScript animations, and you'll be using functions like set interval or more preferably request animation frame. Google is your best friend for this sort of thing. In addition, there is a React workshop coming up, and you should totally check that out. And if you're going to use React, there are some really good animation libraries available for React, like Framer Motion and React Spring. They're really good and make it easy to make more complicated animations without having to do some really complicated code. In addition, there's a really good article, an interactive article on CSS transitions that I'll post in the chat soon. You should definitely check that out afterwards. And I can't tell you what learning structure is best for you, but if there's anything I've learned while learning how to code, is that learning the same concept from multiple different ways can be really helpful. So that's a wrap for the workshop. I'm also a mentor here, so feel free to ask for help in the Discord channels, and I'll try to help you out with whatever code. If it's related to animations or anything, I'll try to help. And hope the rest of NeoHacks is great for you all. I'll stick around a bit longer to answer any questions, and otherwise, that's all. Also, if you have any feedback for me, that would be appreciated. This is like the second time I've ever done a workshop, so like I'm kind of new to this, and any feedback would help me improve because I know there's always room to improve when it comes to teaching and that sort of thing. And yeah, that's all. I'll post that article link in a moment. This article goes way deeper than my workshop did and uses these interactive code editors. And it's really good for like if you want another perspective or more advanced information on CSS transitions. I totally recommend checking this out. It's really good. Probably explains it better than I did even. Whichever works for you, try it out, ask any questions, and that's all.
Thank you so much for coming.
It was a really good lesson.